The house was quiet the morning they told me to leave. No argument. No raised voices. Just my father standing at the kitchen door, arms crossed, eyes somewhere past my shoulder. My mother didn't look at me at all. There was a bag on the floor. My bag. Already packed. I hadn't packed it. My sister stood at the top of the stairs. She was watching. Not crying. Not speaking. Just watching, with both hands pressed flat against the railing like she needed something to hold on to. I looked at her. She looked away. I asked what was happening. My father said one sentence. Short. Final. Like he'd practiced it. I asked if I could explain myself. My mother walked out of the room. The door opened. The morning air came in cold. I stood there for a moment, 5 seconds, maybe 10, looking at the bag, looking at the stairs, looking at the space where my mother had just been standing. My sister was gone too. Back to her room. Door closed. That's when I realized something was very wrong. My name isn't important. What matters is that I was 23 years old, working a part-time job, taking evening classes, and living at home to save money. Unremarkable. Quiet. The kind of person who does the dishes without being asked and doesn't leave dishes in the sink. That was my life. Predictable and calm. The first sign was so small I almost didn't catch it. It was a Tuesday. I came home from work, and my mother didn't greet me the way she normally did. Not a cold silence, just a slightly shorter version of the usual warmth. Half a smile instead of a full one. Eyes that moved on too quickly. I told myself she was tired. A week later, my father changed the password on the home Wi-Fi and didn't tell me. I only noticed because my phone dropped off the network and I asked him about it. He said he'd forgotten. He gave me the new one, but something in his tone was different. Careful. Like he'd already decided to say that before I asked. Then there was a dinner where my sister arrived late, sat down, and within 10 minutes the whole table's attention was on her. Not unusually, she'd always been the more expressive one, the one who filled a room. But that night, she kept glancing at me between sentences. Short looks. Checking something. I didn't know what she was checking. I noticed my parents started having conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Not loudly. Not dramatically. The words just trailed off and someone would change the subject. If you weren't paying attention, you'd never catch it. I was paying attention. My younger cousin called one afternoon asking how I was doing in a way that felt rehearsed. Like someone had suggested she check on me. I asked her why she was calling. She said no reason. Then she asked, very casually, if everything was okay at home. I said yes. Then I called my aunt, her mother, and said hello, and within 30 seconds the conversation moved to my sister, how hard things had been for her lately, how sensitive she was, how she needed support. I hadn't brought up my sister at all. That night I lay in bed and went through every moment from the past 3 weeks. Every shortened conversation. Every room I walked into and felt something shift. Every meal where someone's eyes moved away from mine too quickly. Something had been said about me. I didn't know what. I didn't know to whom. But something had been planted, quietly, in the minds of the people around me, and it had been growing for weeks before I noticed the soil had changed. The next morning I mentioned to my mother, offhandedly, that I'd been feeling a bit distant from everyone lately. She said I was imagining things. She said it kindly, with a small laugh and a hand on my arm. She said I'd always been too sensitive. She'd never said that about me before. Not once in 23 years. I smiled. I nodded. I finished my coffee. I didn't push. I didn't explain. I didn't defend. Because I understood something in that moment. If I reacted, if I asked too many questions, showed too much concern, pushed back too hard, whoever had started this would know that I knew. And they would adjust. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. Watching is a skill most people don't realize they have. You don't need special tools. You don't need access to things you shouldn't have. You just need patience, and the willingness to let silence do the work that questions never could. I started small. I paid attention to timing. Who texted whom after I left a room? How long my sister stayed on her phone after certain conversations. When my mother's expression changed and what, exactly, had just been said before it did. I kept a notebook. Not dramatic entries, no dates, no headers. Just short observations. 3 words, sometimes 4. Dad avoided eye contact. Sister left room when I entered kitchen. Mom asked about my work schedule twice in one day. Small things. Individually meaningless. Together, a pattern. 2 weeks in, the pattern had a shape. It centered on my sister. She was 20 years old. Still at home. Between colleges, she'd left her first one after 1 semester and the second plan hadn't materialized yet. My parents didn't push her. They never really had. She was the kind of person who inspired protection in people without asking for it. Soft-spoken. Easily overwhelmed. A face that looked permanently on the edge of something difficult. I had never resented her for any of that. But I was beginning to understand that she had been using it. The first concrete thing I found wasn't something I went looking for. It came to me by accident, the way the most important things often do. I was in the hallway outside her room. Her door wasn't fully closed. She was on a call, voice low, but not low enough. I didn't stop walking. I didn't press myself against the wall. I just slowed, naturally, the way anyone might if they heard their own name. She said my name twice in 30 seconds. Then she said, I didn't want to say anything but I was scared. I didn't know who else to tell. A pause. Then, I know. I needed someone to believe me. I kept walking. Into my room. Door closed quietly behind me. I sat on the edge of my bed and I stayed very still for a long time. The next morning, she left for a friend's place and said she'd be back by evening. I want to be clear about what I did next. I didn't go into her room looking for ammunition. I went in because her window sometimes didn't latch properly and we'd had rain forecast, and she had books on her windowsill she cared about. That part was true. But while I was there, I noticed her laptop on her desk. Open. Unlocked. Screen still on. I didn't touch it. What I did notice, from where I was standing, was the application open on the screen. A messaging app. And visible without touching anything, without scrolling, just from the angle I was standing at, was a conversation thread with a name I recognized. My aunt. The one whose daughter had called me asking careful questions. The preview line visible on screen, again, I didn't touch anything, read, they believed you. Don't worry about the rest. I closed her window. I straightened the books. I left the room exactly as I found it. But now I knew there was something to find. I went back to my notebook. I looked at the pattern again with fresh eyes. And I realized there was one piece of the timeline I hadn't examined properly. 6 weeks earlier, there had been a disagreement between my sister and me. Minor. Forgotten, or so I thought. She had borrowed money, a small amount, and I'd asked for it back because I needed it for a course enrollment fee. She'd gotten upset. Said I was making her feel guilty. Said she'd pay it back when she could. I had let it go within a day. Never mentioned it again. But apparently, she hadn't let it go. I went through my own phone that night. Old texts. Nothing unusual on the surface. But I found something I'd overlooked, a message from my mother, sent about 5 weeks ago, that I'd read quickly and not thought about. Are you doing okay? Your sister mentioned you've been stressed lately. Just checking. Stressed. That was the word used. I'd replied that I was fine. My mother had sent a heart emoji and the conversation had ended. I stared at that message for a long time. At the phrase your sister mentioned. At the timing, 2 weeks after the money disagreement. At the way my mother had framed it. Not your sister said you seem stressed. Not are things okay between you two? Just, your sister mentioned. Planted. Quietly. Early. Whatever my sister had told people, she had started telling it weeks before I noticed anything was wrong. By the time I felt the temperature change in my own home, she had already had those conversations. Multiple people already had a version of me in their heads that I hadn't been given the chance to correct. I sat with that for a long time. Then I made a decision. I was not going to walk into the living room and confront her. I was not going to send a message to my aunt. I was not going to sit my parents down and tell them what I'd heard through a half-open door. Because none of that would work. I had fragments. Impressions. A message preview I'd seen at an angle and a phone call I'd overheard from a hallway. That wasn't enough. And beyond that, if I moved too early, she would pivot. She would reframe. She would look at my parents with that expression she had, the one that made people want to protect her, and whatever I brought to the table would become proof of exactly what she'd been saying about me. I needed more than what I had. I needed something she couldn't explain away. Confronting them would have ruined everything. There is a particular kind of calm that comes when you stop being afraid. Not the calm of someone who has given up. Not the calm of someone who doesn't care anymore. The calm of someone who has made a decision and is now simply executing it. One step at a time. No wasted movement. No noise. That was where I was. I had stopped grieving the situation. I had stopped replaying dinners and hallway conversations and half-smiles, looking for the moment I could have caught it earlier. That kind of thinking is a trap. It keeps you anchored to something you cannot change. I was only interested in what I could change. The first thing I did was organize everything I had. The notebook. The screenshot I had taken, carefully, quietly, of my mother's old text message. The date of the money disagreement, which I cross-referenced with the timestamps of behavioral changes I'd recorded. A rough timeline, written out cleanly on a single page, with no emotion in it. Just facts arranged in order. It looked, even to me, more damning on paper than it had felt living through it. But I still needed the center of it. The actual claim. Whatever my sister had told people, I still didn't know the exact words. I had the shape of a lie. I didn't have the lie itself. That changed on a Thursday evening. My mother had a habit of leaving her phone on the kitchen counter when she cooked. Screen down, but notifications lit up the edges. I wasn't watching for anything specific that night. I was making tea. She was at the stove. Her phone lit up. She picked it up, read something, and her expression did a thing I had learned to notice, a small tightening around the eyes. The kind that means the message confirmed something she'd already been thinking. She typed a reply quickly and put the phone back down. When she left the kitchen to call my father for dinner, I didn't look at her phone. I didn't touch it. But I had seen the notification banner before she picked it up. It was from my aunt. 2 words visible in the preview, still worried. Still. Which meant they had been worried for a while. Which meant whatever story was circulating, it was ongoing. Active. Being maintained. I made my tea. I sat at dinner. I was pleasant. I asked my father about his week. I was building something, and I needed them comfortable. The following week, I did something I had been putting off because it felt like an overreaction. I called a lawyer. Not a family lawyer. A solicitor who specialized in defamation and what she described, in our first call, as reputation harm within family and workplace structures. I found her through a recommendation from a former classmate who had gone through something with a business partner. I told her the situation plainly, in the same way I had written it in my notebook. No emotion. Just the timeline, the evidence, the patterns. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she asked me 3 questions. First, had any of this affected my employment or educational standing? I told her it hadn't yet, but that I had been asked by my supervisor, casually, in the break room, if everything was okay at home. My supervisor knew my aunt socially. I hadn't made that connection until I was telling the lawyer. She made a note. Second, did I have any reason to believe the claim, whatever it was, had been made to anyone outside the family? I told her about my supervisor. She made another note. Third, was I still living in the home? I said yes. She told me that was actually useful. That I should continue to behave normally, document everything, and under no circumstances confront anyone before we had spoken again. She said, "You've been careful so far. Stay careful." I left that call feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Like the ground was solid again. 3 days later, I found the center of it. Not by searching. Not by strategy. By the same mechanism that had given me every piece of this, patience and proximity. My sister had a friend who visited sometimes. Quiet girl. Shy. She had always been kind to me in the passing way that people are kind when they have no reason to be otherwise. She arrived on a Saturday afternoon while my sister was still getting ready. I let her in. We sat in the front room for about 4 minutes making the kind of small talk that fills empty space. Then she said something. Casually. The way people say things when they think a topic is already settled. She said, "I'm sorry, by the way. About what happened. That must have been really hard to deal with." I kept my expression neutral. I said, "It was difficult." She nodded sympathetically. Then she said, "I couldn't believe it when she told me. I mean, taking money from her account without asking. That's not like you. Or, I mean, I don't know, I just wouldn't have expected it." I smiled. Small. Calm. "Yeah," I said. "It was a complicated situation." She nodded again. My sister appeared at the top of the stairs and called her name, and she stood up quickly, relieved to have something to move toward. I stayed in my seat. Taking money from her account without asking. That was it. That was the lie. She had told people, her friend, my aunt, and through my aunt probably my parents, that I had stolen from her. Not borrowed and been slow to repay. Stolen. Accessed her account without permission and taken money. It was the inverse of the truth. Precise. Difficult to disprove without evidence. And perfectly designed to make me look like the kind of person who couldn't be trusted in a home. I went to my room. I wrote it down. I added it to the timeline. Then I called the lawyer. What followed was 2 weeks of the most disciplined silence I have ever maintained. I gathered bank records. Both mine and, through a formal request process the lawyer guided me through, the relevant transaction history that proved no access had ever occurred from my side. I had the original text thread where I had asked my sister for the repayment of money she owed me, not the other way around. I had dates. I had amounts. I had a paper trail that told a completely different story from the one circulating through my family. I made 3 copies of everything. One with the lawyer. One in a secured cloud folder. One printed and stored outside the house. I kept going to dinner. I kept making tea. I kept asking my father about his week. My sister, meanwhile, had grown more comfortable. Lighter. She laughed more at dinner. She had stopped checking me with those quick sideways glances. She thought she had one. She thought the ground had already shifted permanently in her direction, and that I was simply too defeated or too confused to do anything about it. My parents looked at me sometimes with a specific kind of careful pity. The kind reserved for someone you've already made a decision about. They had no idea what was sitting in a folder with their lawyer's email address on it. They thought it was just another day. It wasn't. The morning it happened, I woke up early. Not from anxiety. Not from anticipation. I simply woke up, the way you do when your body knows something has been decided and there is nothing left to dread. I lay there for a few minutes in the quiet. The house was still. I could hear my father moving in the kitchen below, the particular sound of his specific morning routine. Kettle. Cabinet. Spoon against ceramic. I got up. Showered. Dressed carefully. Not formally, but deliberately. The kind of clothes that say, I am composed. I have been composed for a while now. I went downstairs and made myself breakfast. The lawyer had advised a specific sequence of events. Not a confrontation. Not an ambush. A disclosure meeting, her phrase, where the relevant parties were brought together, shown the evidence in a structured way, and given the opportunity to respond. She would be present remotely, on a call, available if legal language was needed. But largely, she had said, the documents would do most of the work. Evidence doesn't argue, she told me in our last call before that morning. It just sits there. That's what makes it effective. I had invited my parents to sit down with me after breakfast. I told them I had something important to share. I was calm when I said it. Not tense. Not loaded. My mother had looked uncertain. My father had looked at me for a moment longer than usual, then nodded. My sister had been in the room when I said it. She had gone very still. We sat at the dining table. The same table where I had watched my mother's expression shift over dinners. Where I had smiled through conversations designed to make me feel like a stranger in my own home. My phone was on the table, propped at an angle, the lawyer visible in a small window on the screen. I introduced her briefly. My father frowned. My mother's hands moved to her lap. My sister sat across from me. She had composed herself. She was doing the thing she did, the expression that made people want to reach across and reassure her. Eyes slightly soft. Posture slightly folded inward. The look of someone fragile, present only because they were trying to be brave. I had seen it my entire life. I understood now how effective it was. I slid the first document across the table. I didn't say anything dramatic. I didn't build to it. I just placed it in front of my parents and said, quietly, "This is the bank transaction record for the period in question." My father picked it up. He read slowly. My mother leaned to see. I watched my sister's face. Something moved behind her eyes. Fast. There and gone. Like a door closing. I slid the second document across. The text thread, printed cleanly, timestamps visible, showing her name, showing the amounts, showing the dates. Her asking to borrow money from me. My agreement. My later request for repayment. My mother made a sound. Very small. Not a word. My father set the papers down and looked up at me. I met his eyes and held them. Calmly. Without anger. Because I wasn't angry. I hadn't been angry in weeks. Anger had burned off a long time ago, and what was left underneath was something quieter and more permanent. I said, "I need you to understand what has been said about me and what is actually true." Then I placed the third document on the table. This one the lawyer had helped me prepare. It was a summary, 1 page, clearly written, outlining the specific claim that had been made, the people it had been made to, the timeline of its spread, and its impact. Including the conversation with my supervisor. Including the language used by my sister's friend on that Saturday afternoon. All of it sourced. All of it referenced. My father read it without speaking. My mother had stopped leaning forward. She was sitting back now, very straight, in the way people sit when something is reorganizing itself inside them and they need their spine to hold them up while it does. My sister said my name. Her voice was careful. She started a sentence, something about context, about being scared, about not meaning for things to go this far. I let her speak. I didn't interrupt. I didn't react. I just let her talk until the words ran out, which they did, fairly quickly, because words that aren't supported by anything real tend to exhaust themselves fast. Then I said, "I'm not asking for an explanation. I'm asking for acknowledgement." Silence. My father looked at my sister. And I watched something happen that I had not fully anticipated, not because I hadn't considered it, but because seeing it was different from imagining it. I watched my father look at his younger daughter with the bank statements in his hand and the printed text thread on the table in front of him, and I watched the thing he had chosen to believe for months quietly stop being believable. It didn't happen loudly. It happened the way most true things happen, without drama, without a sound, in the space between one breath and the next. He set the papers down. He said her name. She looked at her hands. The lawyer spoke briefly. Measured sentences. She outlined, in precise and professional language, what the documented evidence demonstrated and what options existed going forward. She used the word defamation once. She didn't need to use it again. She also said something I had asked her to include. That I was not pursuing any formal action at this time. That what I wanted was acknowledgement and correction. That the people who had been told a false version of events needed to be told the true one, by the person who had given them the false one. That was all I was asking for. No courtroom. No public exposure. No destruction. Just the truth, returned to the places it had been taken from. My mother was crying quietly. Not dramatically. The way someone cries when they realize the thing they were protecting someone from was never real, and what they failed to protect was sitting right in front of them. She looked at me and said she was sorry. 2 words. Plainly delivered. I nodded. I accepted it. My father said it too, after a moment. Slower. Heavier. Like a man setting down something he had been carrying without realizing how much it weighed. My sister didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, what she said was small and insufficient and nowhere near the scale of what had been set in motion. But it was real. I could hear that much, that whatever she said, she meant it. Not as a performance. As someone who had watched a story she'd told herself collapse in real time across a dining room table. I didn't need more than that. I wasn't there for more than that. In the weeks that followed, things moved quietly. My aunt was called. The conversation I was not present for, but my mother told me afterward that it was direct and that my aunt had been given the same documents. My supervisor received a brief, professional message from the lawyer, no accusation, no demand, simply a clarification of facts relevant to a matter that had touched the workplace. My supervisor called me into her office, closed the door, and apologized. I thanked her. I went back to my desk. I did my work. My sister and I did not immediately return to anything resembling normal. That was fine. Some distances need to be crossed slowly, if they are crossed at all. She made small gestures over the following weeks, a meal left outside my door once, a text that said nothing except that she hoped I was okay. I replied that I was. I wasn't performing forgiveness. I wasn't rushing toward it either. I was simply living in the accurate version of my life again, and that was enough for now. My parents and I had one more conversation, about a month later. Not long. Not heavy. My father said that he should have come to me first. That he should have asked. That letting something like that sit and grow without questioning it, he didn't have an excuse for that. I told him I understood how it had happened. And I did. Not because what happened was acceptable, but because I understood human beings well enough by then to know that people believe the stories that come wrapped in emotion. That a daughter who looks frightened is very easy to believe. That a son who seems fine is very easy to overlook. I didn't say any of that. I just said, I know. We're okay. And we were. Slowly. Imperfectly. In the way that real things are okay. Not restored to what they were before, but rebuilt into something that at least had the advantage of being honest. I still have the documents. All 3 copies. The bank records, the text thread, the summary. I don't look at them. There's no reason to. But I haven't deleted them either. Not out of bitterness. Not as a weapon held in reserve. Just because some things are worth keeping. Not to revisit, but to remember that you were not wrong. That you saw what you saw. That you were calm when it mattered and careful when it counted, and that, in the end, the truth did not need you to shout it. It just needed you to show it. The night after the dining room meeting, I sat by my window for a long time. No phone. No notebook. No next move to plan. Just the street below, and the quiet, and the particular feeling of a weight that has been carried so long you forgot it was there, finally, completely, set down. No celebration. No speech. Just the end of something that should never have started. And the beginning of a life that finally felt like mine again. That night, everything was quiet.